This is the Ted Wallachin Podcast. Brought to you by Tom's Place. For the finest in men's clothing at unbeatable prices, it's Tom's Place at 190 Baldwin in the heart of Kensington Market. Tom's Place will suit you. And Halenda's, the meat people. Enjoy their award-winning products at selected Metro, Sobeys, Fortinos, and Foodland locations. Halenda's, the way sausage should taste. And now, here's Ted.
Well, hello, I'm Ted Wallachin. Welcome to the podcast. Thanks again for joining us. And if you're new to this program, I hope you enjoy it. And if you've been with us for a while, hope you are continuing to enjoy it. And I hope you're taking the opportunity to invite some of your friends to join us as well. And if you have any comments, any thoughts, positive or negative, feel free to reach out to me at Ted Wallachin on Twitter, on LinkedIn, and on Facebook as well. Or call me at home at, no, you can't do that. What you can do is you can sit back and enjoy my next guest. This is a remarkable individual, and I've been fortunate to have known him for years. I haven't spoken to him for a while, but we'll get a chance in a minute. He's an award-winning broadcaster, producer, filmmaker, humanitarian. 30-plus years in broadcasting include roles as host and executive producer of George Stroumboulopoulos Tonight, The Hour on CBC, as well as the talk show Stroumboulopoulos, which aired on CNN. And, of course, he hosted Hockey Night in Canada. For his efforts, he has earned 3 Gemini and 6 Canadian Screen Awards. He was Canada's first Goodwill Ambassador for the UN agency World Food Program and is the founder of the George Stroumboulopoulos Music Therapy Scholarship. Thanks very much for taking the time to chat with us. It's been a while since we chatted. I don't know, many years. It's been many years.
Many years. I've been a big fan of yours for so long, and it's really nice to talk with you and speak with you in this context. What a weird world we live in.
Yeah. Are you in Toronto or are you in LA? Because I understand you bounce back and forth, right?
Yeah, I bounce back and forth. I'm in Los Angeles today, but I'm always back and forth from there to here.
Yeah.
You know me. I follow the work.
Yes. Well, you gotta. You're originally a Mississauga boy, which is where I am now. Not originally, but I am originally from Woodbridge. But you're from Mississauga, actually from Malton, right?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, I was born in Toronto. I lived in Chalk Farm, Jane and Wilson, North York, Rexdale, and then Malton. I used to drive a forklift at the airport and work at a Mr. Green on Airport Road. So definitely, my backyard was Airport Road.
Yeah, and you were inducted into the Legends Hall of Fame, the Mississauga Walk of Fame, which is the Legends Walk. Right.
Yeah, that was kind of nice, actually. That was really sweet. And to be there with my mom, because we came to that neighborhood. Like a lot of immigrant families, you just have no idea what this future is going to hold for you. No idea whatsoever. So I think it was a real trip for my family to see that. Actually,
yeah, I would imagine it would be. It's amazing because I've been to a number of those ceremonies, and you talk to people and you think, oh, man, well, I don't think they're going to think that much about it, and they're really quite taken aback, even to the point where it surprises them.
Yeah, I think that's a very accurate assessment of the experience. It's, I think too, because when you get older, when you're younger, at least from my experience and a lot of the people I talk to when they're younger, it's all relative, so they don't really get a sense of what it is that's happening. But when you get older, you realize just the journey you've had to go on to get to this place, and you don't think that anybody's really noticing it. You don't even really take a chance to take stock of it. So when you see moments like that, it's kind of a reflection of just survival, the teams you worked with, the things you've been a part of, and it's if anything, it's a reminder for me to appreciate just what a long, strange trip this has been.
Yeah, but a fascinating trip though, and it's interesting because your trip in as a broadcaster began in radio, and yet I would think that most people in this country would know you from your work on television. And yet, the focus of what you're doing right now is back on radio as well, with your with Strumbo, which is on Apple Music Radio. It's your Apple Music Radio show. 160 countries it's carried in.
It's pretty wild. Yeah, it's kind of pretty wild to be at this stage of my life and to be having the largest audience, which I'm really grateful for. Radio was, I didn't have a career plan, Ted. I know people will say that, but I wouldn't lie to you about it. I didn't have a plan. I grew up in a scenario where you didn't have careers. You had jobs. And so my grandmother wanted me to be a bus driver. Maybe I could get a job working in the landscaping at a golf course or something, but I didn't have any career plans. I don't have any particular level of education. More importantly, I had zero desire to participate. So I didn't want to be the guy that went to school. I'm not achievement based. But when I was working at a movie theater in Rexdale in the Woodbine Center, and I was thinking I was going to become a film director, just making some strange indie movies. And I went to get a motorcycle license, and right next door I saw this course calendar, and in it was radio production. Now I grew up loving radio. I used to call. Remember in Toronto there was a talk radio station on FM called CKO.
Yeah.
I called CKO when I was 11 to have political debates. I loved radio, and so when I saw radio as a possible job, I thought, oh, let me give that a shot because I loved it so much, and I got into it really just to be able to be on air at night and playing songs and taking phone calls from people and keeping people company. So I never had a career goal and I sort of still don't. I mean, I do to a degree, but not in the very obvious ways. And so when I was given this opportunity to go help Apple launch this new Apple Music station, I thought, yeah, because this is a thing I'm passionate for. And no matter what happens in my career, whenever I have moments where I think, what am I doing? Why am I even a part? I put the headphones on, I press play on the CD,
Hmm.
and it's like, this is why I'm supposed to be here.
Yeah.
I just love sharing music and culture with people.
You have a real passion for interviewing, and you've interviewed some of the greatest people around, and the greatest skill that an interviewer can have and needs to have is the ability to listen. It's not really necessarily about the questions; it's whether or not you're listening to what the answer is coming back from that question, because that fuels the next series in the conversation. And yet,
Yeah,
how do you learn to listen? Is if somebody asks you that question? Because somebody asked me that once, and I said, I don't really know, because as a young kid, I didn't really pay attention to anybody.
it's kind of the same for me. I actually think that um, listening is a byproduct of healthy building blocks
Yeah.
and strong building blocks in
Okay.
your curiosity. And I think that I was a very curious kid. I think when you grow up in a scenario where so much of your future is uncertain,
Mm-hmm.
you have to spend an awful lot of time paying attention to what's going on around you just to survive your neighborhood. I didn't grow up in a neighborhood where I thought the police or the church or the government were my friends,
Yeah.
right? So I grew up having to constantly pay attention just to get through the day. And I think what happened inadvertently was I built these curious building blocks
Right.
so
Okay.
that when it came time to sit with people, I I genuinely cared what they had to say. And it wasn't that I was trained to listen, but I will say this: my mom, there was a time where we couldn't really afford a babysitter. I was raised by a single mom. She would take me down in Rexdale to the Albion Library and drop me off in the Albion Library and have me just stay inside there and read books until she would pick me up for lunch. She would then take me down the street to a senior citizens home, and she would tell me, go inside there and find somebody who's alone and be their friend and listen to them because they've lived a life you'll never live. They have experiences you'll never have. But more importantly, your job as a person is to be there for people who don't have anybody. And so I suspect that was an
Yeah.
uh, enormous impact in a way. I was so shy, Ted, I didn't really want to do that kind of thing. My mom had a friend in the senior citizens home called Miss Buckle, and she would go visit Miss Buckle, and I would have to go find somebody else, often a World War II vet, and hear stories of their exploits, see how much they downplayed their incredibly um, traumatic life
Yeah.
they would have the things they would have experienced. And so I learned really early that the idea of listening and interviewing conversations wasn't so that you could hear your own voice, but it was to actually learn about who we are as a people. And I found that to be a very compelling way to live life. And I still do. Like, I still do. That's why when I interview, if I went to Clarence House to interview then Prince Charles, or I interview an up and coming transgender punk band, to me, it's the same
Yeah.
because they both have these incredible things to offer whoever is listening. And so that all started from a very, very young age.
I always believed that you could go and walk into a mall anywhere, grab 10 people, and out of those 10 people, sit down with each of them, and you would get at least two good stories out of every one of those 10 people, even if they're the most boring person that you've ever met in your life, because everybody's got a couple of good stories in them.
It's one of the things I think about your career, Ted. I think one of the things that made you so effective on the air, um, was that maybe deep down you probably, and I don't know you well enough to know if this is true, but I think it felt like deep down you walked that line between believing in people and being unsure about people.
Yeah.
But what you did was express that in a creative way and in a thoughtful way. But to the idea is that we have hope. And I think that's what that is. What you're talking about is we hope that a human connection can happen with everybody,
Yeah.
and that thing can reach other people that we'll never meet. The power of radio is strangers, right? The microphone is a paintbrush for strangers.
Yeah, and one of the greatest experiences I've ever had in my life, not in individual experiences, but I've been meeting people and not knowing anything about them, and by the time I finished talking to them, thinking, and this isn't even on the air, this is just in general, is thinking like, wow, well, that was a fascinating interview, and then you go to tell somebody about this conversation you had, and they say, well, it doesn't sound like much of a big deal, and like, well, to me, I thought it was really, really interesting. You
Yeah,
know,
absolutely.
because and I guess you're
You
right. I
got
guess
to-
curiosity is the key there, isn't it? Then.
Yeah, because I certainly think it is, and I also think that there's something really interesting about our era where, and we were raised in a country based on achievement, and achievement's never been interesting to me. Experience has been interesting to me. So, to me, things don't have to have a result.
Yeah.
They just have to be a thing that happened,
Yeah.
and that I think is what a lot of what gets lost in this era, because we are so definitive about everything. I grew up in radio working with some really amazing program directors who said to me, the second best answer is I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
The best is knowing it because you've done your research, but if you don't know it, that's okay.
Yeah.
Use that as an opportunity to learn, and don't be smug about what you do know, and don't be too beat up about what you don't know. And I put a lot of value in that.
I remember the first couple of times when I transitioned from, and this isn't about me, but we're talking about this. When I transitioned from music radio to talk radio, one of the first things that I felt proud of myself was that I would admit to somebody I was interviewing that I didn't understand their question or didn't understand a word that they were using. I always thought before
That's
that
right.
I shouldn't admit that because it's like admitting a fault. And what do you mean you don't know what that word means? Are you an idiot?
Yeah. Yeah, totally. I mean, ask. Most people don't know because most people are so busy in their lives fighting the class war that's being waged against them, just trying to make their rent or their mortgage or feed their kids.
Yeah.
And so it's, they're not going to know. They're not going to know. I mean, you were on Q and CFNY. You were on two of the great radio stations
Yeah.
of all time.
Yeah. You're right. I was very fortunate. Well, you were on CFNY, but I guess it had already become the Edge then. Had it? Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you were at the Fan, which was
That's right.
another milestone radio station in Toronto because it was our first sports station.
That was my second legal radio job. My second legal one was at the Fan, and I loved it. So
legal?
much.
You had an illegal? All right.
I had an illegal one because when I was in 31 years ago, right around now, like this week, this guy that I went to school with, somehow, I suspect he stole them, got plans for a transmitter and built an illegal transmitter, like a half a watt, a 1 watt, convinced a shopping mall across the street from the senior citizens home I used to go to as a kid, and convinced the shopping mall to let us broadcast to their intercom Christmas music and sell ads to the stores. They didn't know that we also put a transmitter in the back of that closet so you could hear it in the neighborhood. And so that was my first illegal radio opportunity, but it was really fun. I mean, we felt like we were getting away with something because we were.
Now, was sports something that you wanted to do when you got into radio? Was it because you're more of a music guy than a sports guy, right?
I mean, I grew up loving sports and music. To me, sports and music and film were all the same.
Yeah.
And I think I have passions for it all. So I could, politics were probably the biggest fight inside me, and music was political. Sports was an escape at the time, and then as I got older, I realized it's political too. I love sport. Like I figured I was just going to be my hope was to be a play-by-play person in the NBA or in the NHL. That's kind of what I thought I was going to end up doing when I got into media ultimately. But music, to me, playing music was just a little less, selling advertising in the way that sports has become.
Yeah.
So I always felt more comfortable playing music because I think music is this universal language. But I still love sports. I went to the Lakers game last night.
Yeah.
And I loved it, even though I'm not a Laker fan.
You recorded as saying that when you got hired to work on Hockey Night in Canada, you said, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I think the quote was, I didn't think it was a good idea, but I thought it would be fun.
Yeah, that's pretty much it. I thought it was a good idea if they would let me do what they wanted me to do. I didn't think it was a good idea because I knew in my heart there was no chance they were going to let me do the thing that I thought that they needed to do to make this work. I think what happened is, and also, the guy who brought me on to make the change there ended up leaving within a year, and so I was just sort of left.
That's
You
always
know how that
nice.
goes.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So once that happens, you know it's not going to work. I thought it would be fun. I also thought it would be really interesting to take on an opportunity that everybody's against you
Yeah.
internally. I thought that was really interesting. I also knew, like, and I never really want to say this because I don't really want to sound cocky, but I was probably the most experienced broadcaster
Yep.
that ever got the job. Like when the other guys got the job to host it first, they weren't as experienced as I was. I had 25 years on the air by the time I got Hockey Night in Canada. So I was experienced. And I said to one of the people there who said, "Well, you're not a hockey guy." I said, "I'm not supposed to be. I'm supposed to be a broadcaster. You're the hockey guy."
Yeah.
The problem was internally in the company, they they wanted to stay old school. And I was actually told to my face, "We want you to be more conservative and do less music in your life." And I was like, "You guys are crazy. You guys don't understand where this culture is going." And I remember, and I still think they don't. When I was the host, I was told by the people who ended up not wanting me to be there that when I was the host, the ratings were going up with people under 30. And that was the idea, was to make it a little more inclusive. But I knew it wasn't going to work because I knew that they didn't have the stomach for it. I knew that, so I just thought, "What the hell? Let's take the run anyway."
And here we are, 15 years later, 20 years later, whatever it is, and people are getting let go for the opposite reason because they're not appealing to a young enough audience. Lisa LaFlamme, perfect example, right? And she was
Yeah,
appealing to the audience that listens to and watches the TV news. The young ones
yeah,
don't.
yeah. And I feel like sports, because so many sports franchises benefit from tax dollars in that they get land deals for arenas
Yeah.
and all these other benefits. I actually think sports franchises owe a community something. And the problem is when broadcasters become partners and own teams, right? Then what you have is nobody really has any. It's like in broadcasting when multiple ownership was allowed. There was no reason to be better. You could
Yeah.
just ring that cash register because you controlled it. And that's, I always felt like that did a community a disservice, and that even though the businesses were going to grow, I felt like they should be I felt like they should be a little bit more cognizant. I grew up in a city where the Toronto Maple Leafs were owned by somebody that was a racist who didn't let Eastern European players join there, and they were an organization that protected ushers that were abusing little boys.
Yeah.
So I grew up in a city where the Maple Leafs were a dangerous organization, right? And so I always thought this team does not represent my city. This team puts us at risk. Now, obviously, there's that was my perspective when I was a kid, and I think history is borne out that there was a lot of that to be true.
Yeah.
But the Leafs are a much better organization now. But I feel like you owe your community something, and I felt like sports broadcasting needed to evolve, and they felt like it too. That's why they brought me in. But then the guy who brought me in, like I said, he split, and he just left me to the wolves, and I knew what was going to happen. But again, I don't begrudge it. I was
Yeah.
happy for him to get the job. I knew what I signed up for. I don't
So
I don't worry about
it kind of became a battle between sports media and sports journalism. I think that's the
it.
way
Well,
you phrase it, right?
yeah. Yeah, there's a part of that, but also I think that's certainly an issue in sports broadcasting for sure. But for me, it was more about the tone. Like, what are we doing here? What ended up happening is sports cable is different than sports network. Sports cable is just like, there were guys when I was at Hockey Night Canada who were mad that our socks were colorful. These were people in charge. And I thought, okay, like, you have every right to do that, because they said it's just about the game. And I went, it's not just about the game. It's not, it's about the culture. Everybody talks about how hockey is part of our fabric. Well, then talk about the fabric. And so you could tell right away that when the cable people took over, it's like, oh, they have a very different mindset. I'm not knocking them. It's just a mindset that I didn't. I was on the CBC for so long, and the phrase that I've often, I mean, I said this initially and I stand by it, is that when you're on the CBC or any public broadcaster, especially the CBC, you're supposed to be the intellectual and emotional railroad of the country. You are helping these ideas cross the country. Obviously, I don't want to include the colonizing history of the railroad, but you know what I mean.
Yeah,
Metaphorically, it was supposed to be that, and I felt like Hockey Night in Canada was supposed to be a part of that, and they got away from it for a long time, which is fine. They brought me in to bring it back, to do a version of it, a newer version of it, and I think that they didn't have the stomach for what that actually meant. But I also told them, Ted, when they called me, I said, "You don't want this." And they said, "We do." And I went, "No, you don't." And they said, "We do." And I went, "Okay."
Yeah.
I'm game for it. Why not?
Well, because they probably took it as the challenge from you, thinking, "What is this? This guy doesn't know what we want. We'll tell him what he wants."
Yeah. I knew they didn't want it because I knew who they were. Because I knew who they were.
Yeah.
And I don't think you can teach conviction. I think you can teach lots of things, but I think you either have conviction or you don't.
Yeah, that's true.
And I could tell, But the guy who hired me had conviction. Just he left.
Yeah, exactly. George Stroumboulopoulos is my special guest this week. You worked in so many different facets of the media, in radio and television, both here in Canada and in the United States. When you look around and when you see what's happening now with the ownership dwindling down to like 2 or 3 people in this country seemingly control television and radio, how does that make you feel? Because it makes me sick.
Well, I don't think, I think very few things happen by accident. Very few things are a surprise, right? Most things you can sort of trace the history of it. So when I don't think it's unconnected or disconnected that media conglomeration leads to the lack of civics understanding, leads to a democracy in peril. I think they're all connected. So what it makes me feel like is that you what's that line Stephen King said? You sow the dragon's teeth of dissent, and you're surprised when you raise dragons.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think the government did a disservice to everybody in the country by doing a service to a bunch of private media companies, publicly traded media companies who act like this. It's the business. I'm not naive about it. I understand it. And I feel like it's going to get worse. But that's why we're in the situation we're in. When there is no incentive to do the right thing, businesses will not do the right thing because that's not what they're supposed to do. They're just about increasing their shareholders' value, and shareholders want value. So I remember Prime Minister Chrétien once told me, he said, Prime Minister, a government's job is to protect the minority, or protect the minority from the tyranny of the majority. and I always like that. And I wish that more people lived by that. But if you want to know why we have a lot of the troubles we have, it's in part because I think our media is a problem. Now, it's not just the media, it's the people, it's social media, it's unregulated. So like only some broadcasters are regulated, social media is not. So there's lots of reasons why. But if you don't put a value on good journalism and good news, and you just make it about, publicly traded companies getting better share value, well, this is what's going to happen.
Yeah.
There's no incentive for competition.
And when you get approached by, and I'm sure you do, by younger people who say to you, what kind of words of encouragement can you give me, and what kind of thoughts should I have in my mind as I move forward? Isn't it hard to inspire people to enter the world of media today with what you see?
You know what I do, Ted, and I believe this to be true, and I think possibly I'm willfully naive about this, is just be the difference maker.
Yeah.
Figure out, be the person who, be the Bezos or Steve Jobs for this. Like, find your way in, make it better. That's what I hope to do. Ascend to a rank in a company where you can influence positive, because you're right. Look, there are lots of reasons why none of that's going to work, but I choose to believe that you can make a difference in some way. I feel like I'm doing it. I feel like you've done it, and I feel like we're still doing it.
Yeah.
And that's not because we're better than it. It's just because we make the choice. It's
Well,
just a choice.
well, I'm encouraged by some of the things that I see in the media. For example, streaming services, and I know people get ticked off and they say, "Well, God, here comes another $8 a month I got to pay. Or here comes another $12 because they're playing I Love Lucy reruns, and I like those old shows, and now I got to pay for this." But by the same token, the streaming services are sending out a strong signal to mainstream media, like, "Hey, you don't own this anymore, buddy. There's a new kid in town. Pay attention." And the same thing is happening with podcasts as well.
Yep, that's right. And dude, listen, I think, is it Netflix or somebody just did a live stand-up comedy deal with Chris Rock. And so once they do live,
Yeah.
it's over. Like once they do live, it's actually over because live TV exists really now for news and sports and people who don't have broadband, which far too many don't because of the infrastructure issues. But once that gets addressed, once there can be news and news that doesn't require commercials, right? That's what's interesting, is that you don't have to, the streamers aren't into the same kind. They have their own weird metrics for what they consider a success, which isn't just total numbers, but it's how people watch for some. So when they go live, if they can create a news service that doesn't require commercials, that's it, dude. Like that's it. And live sports, like they're already doing live sports. That, like, forget it,
Yeah.
forget it. And I predict in a not too distant future. I'm not the only one predicting this, but those big media conglomerates, because Canada is basically run by telcos, that
Yeah.
those telecommunications companies, they're going to start getting rid of media properties. There's no value. Like, I can't imagine Bell's going to hang on to all this stuff. No way. And neither Rogers is going to try to buy everything up, I suspect, but no one's going to want that stuff.
It's a possibility that some of these small town radio stations, which have now been swallowed up by the Rogers and Chorus and Bell Medias, are going to start reverting back to individual owners, and the individual owners are the ones who make community broadcasting happening. Because they care, they really do have a sense of community. Whereas some guy sitting in a Bell building in Montreal or Toronto doesn't give a rat's ass about really what's going on in Peterborough.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that, how great will those days be? I also think that we don't even know where we're going to go with social media yet. We don't even know what the next online broadcast is going to look and sound like.
Yeah.
The next collection of information and data and people's stories. I think we're at the end of one cycle. You know, the internet started in earnest, like for consumers, when I was brand new in radio. So the first 3 or 4 years of my radio career is when we got an internet signal in a radio station. And I remember when I had a show on CFRB, we were taking stories and ideas from people from social media sites. We were one of the first shows to do that. It was so new. We're now a quarter century away from that. This is the natural. So we're at the end of one cycle. The next wave, when people really figure out blockchain and really figure out new data packets, like we are, it's going to be really, really exciting. I don't even know if those stations are going to even revert back. I think those frequencies are going to go dark.
Yeah.
In lots of places.
Yeah. In many cases, I think you're probably right.
Ted Wallishin returns in a moment.
Have you been tasked with the role of a state executor, or expected maybe in the future you will be? Well, if so, let me make your life a lot simpler by introducing you to my friend Debbie Stanley. Debbie is the founder of ETP Canada. They specialize in estate administration. Their goal simply is to help Canadian executors understand their role and how to deal with the loved one's estate. Let's face it, there's no school for this, but ETP Canada offers services such as executor support, estate accounting, and they have a new online course called Executor Ready. It's an engaging video designed to make estate administration easier and affordable. And those are two comforting thoughts during a stressful time. So call Debbie Stanley at 1-866 309-0387. That's 1-866-309-0387. Or you can get her at info@etpcanada.ca. That's info@etpcanada.ca. Hey, if you're looking to restock your wardrobe, maybe you should consider my friend Tom Mahalik at Tom's Place. He is the inflation fighter, and right now they've got incredible deals like lips and shirts. I love these shirts. Regularly up to $225, now only $66. Designer suits are regularly up to $599, now between $179 and $279. And if you're looking for a nice sports jacket, valued at up to $695, well, they're 50% off. Tom's Place and Kensington Market. They're located at 190 Baldwin. Check them out. They are the inflation fighters.
Now back to Ted Wallachin.
Let's talk about some of the things that you're doing here. Let's talk about which we mentioned, Apple Music radio program heard in excess of 160 countries. And I love the way you look at music. When you said, quote, I love politically charged heavy music. I love when music uses its energy to fight for others and to help its own audience to learn and grow.
I absolutely hate hearing my own narrative reinforced in the media I consume. I want to be better. I want to be lovelier. I want to be more informed. And I grew up in an era where punk rock started and hip hop started.
Yeah.
My version of metal, thrash metal started. So my expectation from an artist, here's the thing. Artists keep talking about how art matters. Well, then make it matter. Expression is important, but that is not the same thing as mattering in a macro level or even in your community. Like it matters to you, and that's great. But if art's supposed to matter to somebody who cannot afford a $6 head of lettuce or whatever it is today, but your expression is valuable, but it doesn't matter if you're not helping somebody else's life get better. That's how I view art, right? Now, I'm not saying my view is the only view. There's a lot. This is how I view it. So when I find artists who make my world a better place, then that's what I really value. I recognize that not every artist can do that. And if you played a whole show of just those songs, while it would be appealing to me, the audience, it would be lost on. But what I like to do is pepper it in, right? Just to remind people from time to time. Look, Ted, this whole world, has been on display, the collapse over the last few years. But if you've been in the media or you've been listening to punk rock since you were a kid, none of this is a surprise.
No.
If I ever wrote a book, it would be called, What Did You Think Was Going to Happen?
Yeah.
Because this is what Joe Strummer and Patti Smith have been singing about. This is what Chuck D has been singing about. This is what we know this because I grew up in poor immigrant neighborhoods. So now when you're losing your jobs, it's like, well, we never had the jobs in the first place that paid any money, So I don't use that to say you didn't know, so you should never know. No, it's like buy better art. You talked about subscriptions, and I'm really glad you brought that up for services, because I do these late night live streams on Instagram, and I got a lot of people who will tell me they'll complain about the news, or they'll complain about whatever journalism, or why didn't I know this story, or how come the media didn't tell us this story? And I'll say to them, go over your credit card bills and how many streaming services and services do you subscribe to? Like, how many are you spending? $10 a month for this? Now, how many of you are using that money and subscribing to a journalism source, to a newspaper? Like, you're spending an awful lot of money to watch true crime and reality shows, but how much are you spending to ensure investigative journalism? Because these stories are being told all the time. You're just not buying them. And if you're not buying them, I think the citizen has some responsibility in where you spend your money.
Yeah.
Now, you don't have 100% responsibility because of conditioning, brainwashing, and media, all that other stuff. But are you supporting good journalism? Are you supporting artists that are propagating misogyny and homophobia and transphobia? Because if you are, then you are. I'm not telling you how to spend your money, but you have to acknowledge that you are.
Yeah.
And so we have been told this since we were kids. You vote with your pocketbook.
Yeah.
We vote with your pocketbook. So that's how I was raised. And I'm a big believer in reaching people in any way you can. And for me, music has been the most effective way because it's the way that got me. It's the way that really crystallized, like Bob Dylan and things like that, really crystallized what a fight is. I'm so grateful that I was like 19 when Rage Against the Machine came out. You listen to Rage Against the Machine now, Ted, they're better and more impactful than almost everybody.
Well, it's interesting when you listen back to the music that some of it was considered to be mainstream, which succeeded 20 years later. Some of it was considered to be so far out and so far underground that nobody would ever hear of it, and now somehow because it never really went away,
No.
and in fact while it was underground, it was raising kids. And those
Raising kids.
kids are now adults, and now they're now the ones who are creating what's being heard. Where people are saying, "Well, that's new." Well, not really.
No, the great when the United States started to ban the kind of political messaging
Yeah,
from
yeah.
some like the great folk singers, what they didn't realize was when they banned them, one of the things they allowed them to do was to play for children.
No.
So so these artists were indoctrinating generations of children to care. Those children end up making Sesame Street and the Muppet Show and things that, like, if you ever watched Sesame Street, you never saw a nuclear family on Sesame Street. You never saw anything that would make a kid growing up in a single parent home feel like they didn't have something normal.
No.
That was an intentional choice from Jim Henson and his part. Like, they made that choice, the Henson family, husband and wife. And those are the kind of people that were indoctrinated by the great folk singers who were banned from playing for adults
Yeah.
because the House and Un-American Activities were just too stupid to realize that the children really were the future.
Yeah. Exactly. And you
Yep.
talk about one of your earliest musical. When I read this, I laughed. Musical memories was watching as a 5-year-old. Watching. This sounds like somebody who's on drugs put this together. Watching Alice Cooper on the Muppet Show.
Changed my life, Ted. It changed my life. I was sitting in my home. I was living in Rexdale. My family hadn't split up yet, and I watched because I was into creepy crawly things. I don't know why. I was a boy. It was whatever.
Yeah.
But my mom said that's what boys are into when I was a kid. But all of a sudden, there's this opening scene where he's got weird creatures on him. But then his performance, there's a casket, and Alice Cooper rises from the casket
Wow.
just like a vampire and starts to sing "Welcome to My Nightmare." That's children's programming I watched. No doubt that was going to influence me. And you know what's funny is the same year, what my mother, maybe a year after, I told you my mother had made me stay inside a library while she went to work
Yeah.
with the librarians, babysitters. I watched a bunch of adults walk behind a curtain. I followed them. They had these banquet chairs and a pull-down projection screen, and I sat there, and they were playing movies for adults in the theater, and I watched Night of the Living Dead.
Wow.
So I saw all this before I was 10, and The Exorcist. There's no surprise it turned out the way I did.
And the really funny thing about here's this 5-year-old kid. You couldn't put the scenario together. Here's a 5-year-old kid. He's watching Alice Cooper, one of the scariest guys in rock music at the time, on the Muppet Show. And
Right,
yet,
right.
5 minutes after this is over, there's a good chance that he wipes off his makeup, gets into his BMW, and drives to the Riviera Golf Club because he's like a 3-scratch handicapper.
Totally. You never know how you're going to impact the kid. You never know.
Yeah.
I actually talked to Alice about it years later.
Yeah.
And he laughed because he just he's like, I just did it because I thought it would be cool. Alice was the first musician, I believe, who was ever on the cover of Forbes magazine because Alice was in industry before anybody could really figure out how to do it.
Yeah.
Vince was, yeah. And totally, he's a scratch, and he's a born again Christian, which is amazing because my mother, who hated the music I listened to, who was also a Christian, used to say to me, "Hey, will you talk to Alice about the Lord?" So I would bring it up to him, and he would say hi to your mom for me
Mhm.
because he knew they had very similar values.
Your mom's of Ukrainian descent.
She's Ukrainian, born in Poland. What's the joke my mom used to say that she lived in 3 countries by the time she was 12, and they never moved once.
That's right. The borders. That's right. For people who don't know that there was a time that if you lived in this part of the world, you were living in Poland. A few years later, you're still living in that town, but you're now living in Ukraine. And 5 years
right.
later, you're still living in that town, but you're now back in Poland.
Exactly, and maybe even Germany at one point.
Yeah, exactly. And so you watch the news and you see what's going on with the invasion, the Russians invading Ukraine. Do you take that personally? What's your reaction?
Yeah, 100%. And I understand there are a lot of people who had issue with the way the media covered it by giving it a lot of attention. And I tried to explain to them what makes this conflict different than other conflicts, in my mind, is geopolitically, is that you have a UN Security Council nation invading a democratic country. Like this is different than any other kind of skirmish, because it is a UN Security Council nation. So that politically, that's it. But also because, listen, I try to get beyond nationalism. I'm not a real big fan of nationalism, but watching the people of Ukraine take up arms and just completely surprise the Russians. I mean, that really spoke to the punk rock in me.
Yeah.
All war is a crime. All war is a crime. I'm against all war. But if someone's going to invade your country and you have an opportunity to destroy it, like the way they are, Ukraine, I mean, there's a little part of me that feels really and I have family there, and I'm watching people through hell, and yeah, so it certainly does speak to me on a family level.
I'm extremely proud of because I have Ukrainian descent as well, and I'm extremely proud of the fight that they've put up. But I'm also really quite amazed at the support universally from so many different levels of life, whether it be the entertainment industry, the sporting industry, business gets too involved with politics too often, where things get pushed aside, and we'd like to help out, but we've kind of got money invested there, so we can't really. But the outpouring of emotion from, I mean, like when you see Paul McCartney walk on stage with the Ukrainian flag, you go like, "Holy shit, man! I never dreamt that in my entire life."
Yeah, it is pretty amazing. And I think a lot of the reason why there was so much initial response politically to this is because this is actually a message to China. Like this is a message to China. The world is sort of showing China, now if you try this in Taiwan, here's how quickly we'll mobilize. Because I think that's the big geopolitical question that every world leader will either admit to or not admit to, is that they don't know what to do with China and Taiwan, and if China moves. I've been told by people in high-ranking positions that it is going to be catastrophic if that happens. And China is watching Russia. So part of the response for Ukraine was to help Ukrainian people, but there is a geopolitical response that is happening in part as a message to China saying, this is what we'll do. And I think that there's a lot of stuff. But look, this is a UN Security Council nuclear nation that invaded a country who gave up their nuclear weapons with the promise of being protected by the international community. So if the international community didn't step up to defend Ukraine, even though they promised, there was no reason for any country to give up their nukes, right? And so they had to do it. They had to do it. But I think it's and I think the other problem too, Ted, is everybody thinks that the global powers are all acting with certainty. They don't really know what to do. It's all just, they're trying things. No one really knows what to do with Russia. No one really knows what to do with China. There are efforts, but no one, I just came back from Syria. The Russian influence in Syria is quite impactful. And if Putin falls, what's the impact on Syria? Well, you can say goodbye to that government. And then what regime? And then what happens if this continues in Iran and the power vacuum, does a better governments? Like the whole thing is going to go up in Europe and Eastern Europe and the Middle East, Asia, if this continues. And it's no one really knows what to do. They're all just trying to figure it out.
Yeah. Over the years, George Stroumboulopoulos is my guest. You've interviewed so many politicians. Did anybody ever approach you about running?
Yeah, I've been approached for running for all three parties.
All three.
Actually, all three parties. Well, I mean, there's more than three, but the three major parties in Canada.
Well, some could argue there's only two, but go ahead.
Fair enough. No, that's true. I have been approached for running. I had said to them at the time, well, there were two things. Number one, I said I wasn't ready. I didn't think I was smart enough to be a part of that. Like I wasn't as plugged into the system as I could have been politically. The other thing was I liked the politician in my riding, and I refuse to run in a riding where I don't live. And I actually think it should be illegal for any candidate to run in a riding they don't live in or haven't lived in for at least 5 years, because, or maybe 3 years, because I do believe that parachute candidates, I understand the political value, but I think it's anti-democratic. They're like omnibus bills. There's logic behind it, but I think it does more harm than good, and in many respects, not always. And so I refuse to run in a riding I didn't live in. I honestly don't really feel like I belong to any of the parties. I don't think any of them speak to me. I think that there are elements of two parties that I can go, yeah, I get some of this. I get some of this, and I believe in a lot of the values. Clearly, my values are very left wing in many respects.
Yeah.
I understand that. I used to always say never. I don't think I say never anymore, but I just wasn't ready at the time. I don't think I want to now.
Yeah.
I don't think I want to now. I think politics is very straight, but I do think that Canada has a real. I really believe in Canada as an idea. And I think we're a country, and every good country should be a promise. Not something that you brag about what you are, but a thing that you are constantly striving to be. And Canada does have a legacy of colonialism and genocide. I think that the people in power today did not contribute to that. Sorry, did not commit that, but they contribute to it by continuing certain policies. And I believe that Canada could be a light to the world. Bono said many times, and he was right, the world needs more Canada. But he didn't really mean the Canada we have. He meant the Canada we say we are,
Yeah.
I believe.
Yeah.
And so I don't love nationalism, but I do see the value in good governance. And I believe in good governance. And I believe in governments with oversight. And I believe in good policy. And I believe in equity. And I believe in all these things that we're never going to have if it isn't changed systemically. And I know there are lots of great politicians who get there, and they're trying.
Mm-hmm.
And they're trying. I would decentralize a lot of it. Not the way they're trying in Alberta, but I would really work on empowering communities. I know the Prime Minister cares about people. I know the guy. He cares. Like, I know he cares. Does that party care? I don't know. Are the NDP ever going to be effective? I don't know. I mean, they are provincially. We have healthcare because of the leadership of an NDP party in Saskatchewan all those years ago with Thomas Douglas. And so the Conservative Party is in a really interesting place right now. And I think Conservatives are going to do in Canada what the American Conservatives had to do, is decide what are they okay with.
Yeah.
But liberal parties have to go through that too, because there are a lot of things. So I think that there's all these parties that I think this idea that you're just a member of one party doesn't work for me. I've always encouraged people to to become members of all three parties, and then go to the conventions and elect the leader that you are the most comfortable with. So when there's a general election, it's not holding your nose, right? But I'm not sure we can.
I wish that they could somehow get it through the thick skulls. If you're really there for the benefit of the people, for the benefit of the nation, then pay attention to what the guy across the hallway is saying to you, across the floor saying to you or her, because maybe they have a good point, and maybe you even agree with them, but damn, you can't agree with them because it's going against your party. So therefore, right. Are you there for the party, or are you there for the country? Well, the answer is clearly you're there for your party.
Yes, exactly. And one of the reasons why, if I ever did become a member of the political scenario, I know how to handle the media, because I've been in the media for so long.
Yeah.
But what I firmly believe in is that there is one issue in the country that is bipartisan or tripartisan, quadripartisan. There's one issue that, if it was addressed, every single party's values would be supported, and that is if you address the root causes and the causes of poverty.
Yeah.
Because if you address poverty and inequality and equity, for the NDP, you're getting all the things that you asked for.
Yeah.
For the Liberal Party, you're getting all the things you want. And for Conservatives, who have historically voted against these pro-poverty movements, not all, by the way, not just them, so have the Liberals. And you can't really blame the NDP federally, because they never had the chance federally. Jack got really close, and I miss Jack every day. But if for Conservatives, addressing the root causes of poverty is actually one of the things that will create a healthy economy, which they seem to value so much, which will, if you address the root causes of poverty, and part of that is addressing food and food prices and food quality and health issues, now you're bringing down the cost of healthcare. So if you address the root causes of poverty and inequality and inequity, Ted, I firmly believe that that's it. Like that, everything else. Now, parties will then go back to fighting about how much money should we give this country? What is sustainable development internationally our responsibility? Those are legitimate political debates. I believe it is our job, because borders are arbitrary, as we talked about earlier.
Yeah.
But you can have a legitimate political debate about whether you believe interventionism is a political has political value or not. You can have your opinion, but what you cannot debate is it our job to address poverty? Because to me, that's a human rights issue. So if every party, if a party, a leader or party platform doesn't include actual poverty change fighting and addressing a food plan properly, well, then I don't believe that they're the party for the country. But it's the one issue that is completely nonpartisan.
This all makes sense as to why you became Canada's first goodwill ambassador to the UN Agency for World Food Program. It all makes sense to understand you more, and people understand you a little bit better. But talk to me as well about the George Stroumboulopoulos Music Therapy Scholarship.
Yeah, thanks for bringing that up. I love that scholarship. Music therapy to me is an amazing profession, and a lot of people will talk about the value of music. I hear music, it makes me feel better. But if you put that music in the hands of a skilled professional, a trained professional, the value it provides to somebody, especially somebody in palliative care, somebody with physical or intellectual challenges, that this is about quality of life and about compassion and kindness. It doesn't get a lot of support from government agencies, which is why I started this foundation, which is just all I'm doing is giving some money to help fund a couple of music therapists' education, to help train more music therapists. It's not a results-based business, right, Ted? It's not the kind of thing where you can say, this money goes to create this person so we have a cure. This isn't about a cure. This is about human decency and compassion and kindness. And it, to me, the need for results is a big challenge. It's not what drives me. What drives me is, are you making the people in your life, in your community's lives, easier to live? That's what I value the most. And music therapists do that. Palliative care, to be a palliative care attendant in any capacity, is one of the most gracious things you can do. You are there taking somebody to the end of their time here. And you're doing it with compassion and patience. And why wouldn't we want that? Why wouldn't we want more of this? That's why when they reached out to me to be a part of it, I said, absolutely. Yeah. I'm happy to. We went from one scholarship a year to two. I'm hoping we're about to pick our next two candidates who will be awarded. What we do is we get all their submissions. I don't know who they are. I don't know their names. I just look at the qualifications and who the person I think who would be the one. There's a team of us who select it. It brings me. It's like, it's a thing that I'm so thrilled to be a part of it. I'm so grateful to be a part of, to help train more music therapists. And I want the governments to step up, and I want it to be a funded program. We talk about a shortage of nurses, which isn't really crucial. This is crucial as well. Yeah. Nurses, clearly. Crisis is different, but this is also really important. And I think one thing I learned, I didn't know when I was younger in the media, I used to look at issue by issue, but what I realized as I got older and got to interview more people and travel the world more was that really one issue isn't the issue. You can't be a single issue voter. Everything is connected. You need to be a holistic citizen. You have to look at the whole picture. And I learned to be a holistic citizen as I got older, which made it harder to parse out information because people want sound bites. But I'm not there to make this easy for the viewer. I'm there to just give you the information. And I'm there I talk to politicians. I'm like, let's get behind this. Here's why. You can't brag about this, by the way. You can't go hold a press conference and brag about this. But in 20 years from now, you'll have a better country that you helped you helped create. That's what this is about. Yeah. And so music therapy to me is a really big part of that.
It was amazing. I was talking a number of years ago to some people who were involved in music and how the assistance in music brings people who suffer from dementia and Alzheimer's disease. And people talk about how they have short-term memory loss and long-term memory loss. And the one thing that Alzheimer's patients in many cases don't lose is music, songs, lyrics to songs that they sang when they were 6, 7, 8 years of age, and now they're in their 80s and they can remember the exact lyrics and they can't remember what they did last week.
Right. And I think a lot of it is because my doctorate is not in science, nor is it real. It's just honorary. But music is, as I was told by some scientists, music is stored in so many different parts of the brain that as one part in the brain, neuroplasticity, as part of your brain is starting to either degrade or evolve or whatever, the music is elsewhere. So it's this one thing that you can always go to. Yeah. And to me, what a gift. what a gift that we don't lose music. We don't lose the joy it brings us. And that's the thing, I'm 50 years old and I'm still 27 in my heart.
Yeah.
And I still listen to music the way I did when I was 14.
Yeah.
Like I've never lost that connection to music. And I hope I never, ever do. But based on what you're talking about and the scientists say, maybe I never will.
Yeah, exactly. And I neglected to mention, by the way, that you have an honorary doctorate of laws from the University of Calgary. So,
but it was in laws, yeah, and I appreciate it. And that was for civics. But I remember going there thinking, God, I never even, the only time I ever stepped foot on a university, aside for like a paid speaking gig, was to go party and get drunk when I was 18. I never went to university. So,
yeah.
So it was strange. The idea, I didn't even apply to university, but I was really grateful for the University of Calgary. I love the city of Calgary so much. I got it was a really cool doctorate. And they said it was for my work in civics and trying to get people involved in politics. And so I was really grateful for that.
So have you ever been tempted when somebody says, is there a doctor at a house, to put up your hand?
I do. But then I say it's only honorary and it's only in laws. Yeah. But okay, I still get mail from the University of Calgary that says Dr. George Stroumboulopoulos, which makes me laugh every single time.
Yeah, I guess it would. This has been a real pleasure talking to you, George, about so many different. And my God, you and I could talk for hours and hours and hours. And I hope we get the chance to do this again sometime.
I really do too, and I got to tell you, Ted, and you know that Jim Richards is my best friend who you worked with for years.
I love Jim.
Yeah, and he loves you. And I when I was in radio, and not quite sure what kind of broadcaster I was going to become, I would listen to you, and I loved the way you told stories, and I loved the way you were a professional broadcaster, but you never sounded plastic. You sounded like the person. You sounded like a human being who just had a skill set that was just beyond our reach, but you were still a human. And you were really impactful on a lot of us in radio college, listening to what you did. So really grateful to listen to you and to learn from you.
I can't tell you how much that means to me. And I've always prided myself as being someone who bordered on professionalism.
That's the best we can hope for.
Exactly. George, all the best to you, my friend, and we'll talk again soon. And thanks once again to all for listening. And if you do get a chance, click on the follow button and the podcast will always be there for you. And also, if you get a chance, go online and fill out your organ and tissue donation card. You could change or even save a life. Have a great week.
The Ted Wallacham Podcast has been brought to you by Tom's Place. For the finest in men's clothing at unbeatable prices, it's Tom's Place at 190 Baldwin in the heart of Kensington Market. Tom's Place will suit you. And Helenda's, the meat people. Enjoy their award-winning products at selected Metro, Sobeys, Fortino's, and Foodland locations. Helenda's, the way sausage should taste. The Ted Wallacham Podcast is produced by Joey Roselli. Technical production by Paul Gatt. Music by Bike Thieves. I'm Becky Coles. Submit your questions and comments to ted@twmedia.ca.